Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host Manny and I'm back for my second episode with some more topics and storylines to talk with you guys about. As usual, I will start it off with the Chip Shot segment, talking about some off the field, unrelated sort of news in the NFL or in football in general. This time I'm going to be talking about the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade, as well as some comments made by Micah Parson during the Super Bowl and during a conversation that he had with his owner Jerry Jones about the future of the Dallas Cowboys. The second segment, I will talk about some free agency updates with some important dates starting tomorrow, and just giving you guys some updates, some free agency rumors that I've heard, and some scenarios that could potentially happen throughout the duration of the offseason. In the second half of the show, I'll break down Russel Wilson's contract situation and some of the numbers involved in that, some teams that I think would be a fit for him, and just breaking that situation down with you guys. Before then, I will end the show with a discussion. As always, I try to make the last segment an open topic, a sort of discussion. This time it'll be around the NFC teams that I believe give the 49ers the best chance at challenging them and potentially surpassing them next season if everything goes the way I think, the way I had it planned out in some of the scenarios I break down for you guys towards the end of the show. But that'll be the last thing we talk about. But before I jump into the Chip Shot segment, I want to remind you guys to please like and follow the show. We get a lot of questions from viewers during the show, so to make sure I see your question, please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker down below me with any question that you may have. The tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. This just makes sure I'm able to see your question. It's put to the top of the list, and I'm able to read it, engage with it, and read it on air for you guys to see. It's also just a big help for not only this show, but for all the shows across the networks, and we really appreciate if you guys could do that. But like I mentioned, now we are able to jump into the first segment of the show, that being the Chip Shot segment of the show. So, the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade. A lot of good and a lot of bad coming from it, from the events that happened during the parade. You know, it's a shame that it was soiled in some way by the actions, the shooting that occurred, because now that gains most of the news, the headlines, and it's just, like I mentioned, it's a shame. It's disappointing to see that for the Chiefs, that not only made history because they repeated as Super Bowl champions in the first time in a long time, but because it's another step to making even more history, becoming the first team to three-peat, and it was just soiled in the end because of the shooting. But before I get more into the shooting and those terrible events that happened, I wanted to give you guys some of the positives, some of the quotes that were made by the protagonists of the parade. So, the major part of it, the major headlines, the quotes that came from it was that Pat Mahomes, Travis Kelce, let it all out there. They said they were going for the three-peat, and just like last season, they said they would be back here again this year, and they were right. With say what you want about their team, it was worse. The receivers were bad. Travis Kelce's getting old. The distractions off the field with Taylor Swift and everything. Say what you want, but they were back here. They made it back. Patrick Mahomes did his best with what he could, and it turned out as good as any other scenario could have. Him and Travis Kelce, like I mentioned, said they were going for the three-peat, said they were going to end back here again. And a big part of that, if they want to accomplish that, would be Chris Jones. And I'm sure for a lot of Kansas City Chiefs fans, Chris Jones, when they heard Chris Jones at the parade say, and I quote, I ain't going nowhere, baby. And then saying that for the Chiefs, for the fans, it was all I'm sure a relief for them, but I'm sure that there will be some crunching of the numbers, some negotiations definitely that will be going on after that. And just on that topic, I'm going to get into it more in the free agency updates, but I don't expect it to be a long holdout process for the Chiefs or Chris Jones, because I think he did a good job this year of settling for that 1 year deal and going out there and proving again why he could arguably be the second best player on this team. Obviously, the first one's Patrick Mahomes, but you can make a good argument that he is more significant to this team's success than maybe Travis Kelce is. In some of the biggest moments, in the biggest moment arguably in the Super Bowl, he had that pressure on Brock Purdy to make him settle for a field goal on their final drive of the regular time, and it only forced the Chiefs to have to kick a field goal to send it into overtime. And if you remember correctly, more specifically in that moment, that I rewatched that play for a couple times, and I realized that George Kittle engaged with a block for like a moment, and then he got off, and he was actually open in the flat. But because Chris Jones made that play, put some pressure on him, he didn't officially get the sack, but he was in his space and forced Brock Purdy to throw it away. It arguably changed the whole course of that game, because if they score a touchdown, or if he throws it to George Kittle, it might not be a touchdown, but it comes close, and then they have a decision to make on fourth down. If they get really close, they could score a touchdown, and then the Chiefs would be forced to also score a touchdown to send it into overtime. But that's the kind of player he is. He comes up in those biggest moments, even if he doesn't put up gaudy numbers in the regular season with sacks and stuff like that, like other players do. He makes up for it showing up in these moments, Super Bowl winning moments, impact plays that I think will ultimately force the Chiefs to make this a priority, get him signed, and then trying to fix the receivers, any cornerbacks that they might lose in free agency, or just fixing those pieces that they might need come the start of next season. But that being said, same topic, but just transitioning more into the negatives. Obviously, the shooting happened, and there was only one death reported from that incident. Her name was Lisa Lopez, a local radio DJ, was killed in the shooting, and that obviously took away from everything, those events, the tragic event of her passing, and there were some injured casualties as well. And as you guys can see, I'm sure you've seen in some of the slideshow I have up there for you guys, that Patrick Mahomes and Brittany Mahomes actually visited some of those patients from the parade in the hospital, which I thought was a very nice gesture that they did, just to show their support, kind of give back to them for being in there. Obviously, no one could predict those kind of events, that sort of tragedy to happen, but I thought it was a nice gesture for them to show up at the hospital, kind of show their support for and love for their fans. And that also leads me to some other actions that occurred during the shooting, actually, during the hysteria around those moments. You can see it there right now. Trey Smith was one of the players in the shooting that actually was sheltered with a young Chiefs fan during the incident. I'm just paraphrasing, but a quote that he said from an interview he did about the shooting, that, there was a kid there just kind of in a panic mode, and he kind of grabbed them, told them that he was going to take him in with him in, I think, some sort of room or like a closet that they were able to find with like 20 other people stuffed in it. Another just amazing gesture from these players towards their fans, because in those moments, you kind of forget about everything, just make sure everyone's all right. And I thought that was a great gesture by him. And even Andy Reid as well, similar situation, was just around a fan, a younger fan, I'm pretty sure it was, that was just scared, alarmed, not really knowing what was going on. And for Andy Reid, all these other players that maybe had a similar sort of act but wasn't reported on, just had the wherewithal, the calmness of mind to grab the fan, grab someone, comfort them, and tell them that, everything's going to be okay. And I'm sure to them it just seems like an act that any person, any good person would do in that sort of moment, to help another fellow human being out. But for the fans, for all these normal human beings that were at the parade, I'm sure it meant a whole lot more to them. It meant the world to them, probably, that their heroes, in a sense, were able to show that kind of act, that kind of gesture with them. But I just wanted to bring those out there to everyone's attention and say how really amazing that gesture was from the Kansas City Chiefs players. But moving on now to the other topic I had for this segment, some quotes that Micah Parsons made. The Cowboys just seem to always be the talking point in everyday news, media, whatever you want to call it. But this quote, last time I talked about it, Jerry Jones quote. This time it was Micah Parsons who gave a quote during an interview about a conversation that he had with owner Jerry Jones during the Super Bowl and the future of the team. And one thing that he said, or one of the quotes that he said, was that we just sit and talk from before the game until the whole half about players I want to bring in, players I want to be around, who do I need, who do I want to be with. And I thought it was pretty interesting because, that's the sort of conversation you have with, a leader, a guy that is at the top of the hierarchy, right? That the organization, the coaches trust in to kind of relate a message to everyone. The ideas, the kind of identity that his team want to have. And that's a pretty positive message and a pretty positive sign for Michael Parsons, and I'm sure for Dallas Cowboys fans everywhere, that, Michael Parsons is kind of making that step forward with the organization, with taking his team and kind of becoming the leader as he matures more in his career. Because I think, like I mentioned last time with Dak, if he's gone, in my opinion, he's seen as the leader of this team. But with him potentially being gone or the Cowboys not re-signing him, I think they're in a need for a guy like this. And I think coming for a guy like Micah Parsons, arguably their most talented, best player on the entire team, you can make an argument with CeeDee Lamb, but to have your best player be that leader and have that kind of relationship pretty early on in his career with management, to see that they have that trust in him, I'm sure it brings a lot of security and a lot of calmness around the Dallas Cowboys, who are always being talked about, are always in the news, and that pressure over the course of the season just mounts on the players, on any player really, especially the ones playing for the Dallas Cowboys. But I think Micah Parsons, he's taken a step in that right direction, and for this Dallas Cowboys team, with the future looking a little bit uncertain, a little bit wary at times with quarterback, coach, playoffs, it could get lost that this team really needs a leader and someone to ride the ship, direct the ship in the direction it should go, because it's been a long time without any playoff success. So I think this is what the team needed, and if Micah can continue to be in this sort of position with the Cowboys, kind of taking the front foot, leading them into this new generation, this new era of Cowboys led by him, I think they would be in good hands, and it won't be as drastic of a change if they were to change quarterbacks, coach. If they have that sound voice, kind of keeping everything in the organization under wraps, in check, I think it'll serve them a lot better, and it'll be a bigger impact than a lot of people realize in an organization like the Cowboys. So I just thought that was a good sign for the Cowboys, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops into the season through free agency, depending on which players they sign, which ones they bring in, and if Micah agrees with that or not. I'm not saying he should get the final say, but this kind of quote kind of inclines that Jerry Jones values his judgment a little bit, and I'm sure Micah Parsons won't second guess about giving Jerry Jones any input that he may feel would help this team. He already does it in the media. He has his own podcast and everything, says how he feels on there. So it'll be an interesting development over the course of the offseason. But that's going to be it for the Chip Shot segment of this show. I'm going to send it to a quick break real quick, and on the other side of that, we're going to dive deeper into free agency, some rumors, some scenarios that I have for you guys on the other side of this break. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. The show, of course, is presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in that first segment, if you didn't catch it, I talked about the Chip Shots segment that I usually do, recapping the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade, some of the events that went down there, and as well as talking about Micah Parson's latest comments in a conversation that he had with owner Jerry Jones and what that means for the future of the Dallas Cowboys team. But moving on now to the second segment of the show, I have some free agency updates and some rumors that I heard recently that I think are of some significance for this offseason and potentially some moves that we could see throughout the duration of this time. So starting off with an important date in the free agency period, February 20th, tomorrow, Tuesday, through March 5th, the NFL teams can designate franchise tags or transition players. So I'm sure once tomorrow hits, we're going to be seeing a lot of news around teams designating the tag to certain players. Some more rumors around teams potentially not doing it to certain players. Some of the candidates and just a list of the players that I have here written down that could get the franchise tag are linebacker Josh Allen from the Jaguars, Saquon Barkley, Brian Burns from the Carolina Panthers, safety Kyle Duggar, wide receiver T. Higgins, Josh Jacobs from the Raiders, cornerback Jalen Johnson, defensive tackle Justin Madubuike, Baker Mayfield, wide receiver Michael Pittman, L'Jarius Sneed from the Kansas City Chiefs, defensive tackle Christian Wilkins, and Buccaneers safety Antoine Winfield. Some big names there to keep an eye on because a lot of those players are the franchise or some are the impact players on their side of the ball. Obviously, the big names that pop out are Saquon Barkley, T. Higgins, and Baker Mayfield on there as well, But guys like Antoine Winfield, Christian Wilkins also have a big role to play with their teams, and I'm sure that their teams won't want to lose them, but some of them could be cap casualties just based on the cap situations for some teams and just the kind of contract that they'll be looking for out there based on some of the performances, some of the years that these guys have had, or just some based on reputation. Just for example, Baker Mayfield is that example of coming off a great year, arguably his best year. You can make an argument for the year he had with the Cleveland Browns where he took them to the playoffs and beat the Steelers in the first round on the road. But I think this one's just a bit more significant and carries more weight to me for Baker Mayfield because he was passed around some teams, the Panthers, the LA Rams after his time with the Browns. And to come into the Buccaneers where they were transitioning away from obviously the Tom Brady era and the success they had with him, for him to come in, not only win the division, but put up some great numbers, boost up some numbers for Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and just have the offense running such a harmony there at the end where they beat the Eagles and they gave a good run at it with the game they had against the Detroit Lions. But I just think Baker Mayfield made a good case for himself, and just based off of that, I think he'll be requiring a much larger contract than his 1 year deal that he just had, and we'll see if the Buccaneers will be able to pay that or not. They have other guys, like I mentioned, Antoine Winfield, to kind of maneuver, see where everything's at. Mike Evans is due for an extension as well, and he'll obviously want big money because of the numbers that he puts up, always being a reliable weapon for any quarterback, really, that's been there in Tampa Bay. Other guys, Saquon Barkley, I think the Giants would want to tag him, but after last season where they gave Daniel Jones that big extension, a lot of the conversation was, well, how could you not give that to Saquon Barkley, right? He's been the most talented, most reliable guy for this Giants offense, in my opinion. Just in and around the organization, the kind of player he is, the kind of person, never gets into trouble, never seen with any bad reputation towards him. Just all about football, producing for the team and stuff like that. I thought he was going to get the contract extension. If you want to argue that he deserves it more over Daniel Jones, that's a different argument. But the decision was Daniel Jones gets it, and now it's time for Saquon Barkley. I'm sure he'll want to get paid, not only because of what he's produced, but because of the running back market and the kind of stigma that's tied around running backs, about them only lasting a few years, not really making it past the age of 30, maybe 29, before teams start to look for the next guy that's cheaper on his rookie deal, and they've just almost become sort of interchangeable. So Saquon Barkley might be thinking his time is now to get paid before he heads into his later years, and teams aren't going to want to pay him. So I think he might be, because of that, a result of going to somewhere else. If I'm going to be really honest, I would love to see him with a team like the Texans. I think him on the Texans with C.J. Stroud, Tank Dell, who emerged, Nico Collins emerging as a wide receiver one, I think that would be a great team to not only help C.J. Stroud build on his amazing first year, but to help the whole offense as a whole become more well-rounded, to have a star running back like him. All the other guys, again, have their own situations going on. I won't dive into each single one, but those are some of the biggest ones that I thought were crucial, were going to be big pieces that move early or throughout the offseason. But another one that was finalized, the deal that was finalized, was the Ravens signing wide receiver Nelson Agholor to a 1-year contract extension. Agholor had a better season than he's had in the past. With the Eagles, he struggled. Then he kind of was in a loop. Nobody really considered him a vital piece to their team until he found a home with the Ravens. And throughout the duration of the season, I think he became a bit more reliable with Lamar Jackson. He scored in the playoffs, I want to say, against the Texans. He scored a touchdown in that game, if my memory serves me right. It was either that or the Chiefs, but I think this is a good deal for Nelson Agholor, and very low-risk deal for the Ravens because they still need to add to the wide receiver room, in my opinion. I don't think they have enough with Odell and Rashad Bateman there. Zay Flowers is a good piece. I really like him, but I think they just need to build on it. And losing a guy like Nelson Agholor, good blocker, and he doesn't require 7 to 8 looks a game, right? He's a good piece to fit into the offense they're trying to build. So that was finalized. That was something that was made official. But moving into the two bigger topics that I wanted to talk about, some updates. Going back to that first segment in Chip Shots, I wanted to talk about Chris Jones and the sort of numbers, sort of things that are being said about him for his long-term extension. So officially, the Chiefs picked up Chris Jones' contract option, retaining the right to franchise tag him. He's going to be 30 this coming season, but as part of the contract that they renegotiated to end his holdout at the beginning of this past season. Kansas City is going to pay an extra $425 million in earned incentives for Chris Jones. So obviously the goal for the Chiefs, it has been reported that their goal is to find a long-term deal. I'm sure that's the goal for Chris Jones as well. But by picking up that option, they have a backup plan in case they can't make that long-term deal happen. They have a backup plan to franchise tag him, but it'll be a lot more expensive. I want to say it was around 32 or 32.5 million just for the franchise tag on that 1 year deal. So that's obviously not ideal for the Chiefs because they only get him for 1 more year guaranteed potentially, and it's a lot of money. So to work out that long-term deal, it's going to be the goal for the Kansas City Chiefs to try and keep him. And overall, I think he's definitely earned it. I praised him in the first segment with chip shots, but he's one because the Chiefs are in a situation where defensively, most of their players are coming back. They only have some crucial pieces like Chris Jones being the most pivotal one, but L'Jarius Sneed as well. I'm sure everyone saw, or at least I saw, in an interview he did on FanDuel with Kay Adams. She asked him what would be a message that you'd want to send General Manager Veach, and he said just plain and simple to pay him. Pay me were his exact words, and that just kind of inclines to me that he's going to be looking for maybe top 6 to 7 ranked cornerback money, in my opinion, if not more, because I think he believes, like I'm sure anybody would believe, it's on a Super Bowl winning team that he's at the top of the list of top corners in the league. I'm sure that a lot more people have become aware of how good he is, how pivotal he was for the Chiefs. If you hadn't, him and Trent McDuffie are probably the best cornerback duo in the NFL right now as it stands. So retaining a guy like that, keeping the secondary whole, and basically the entirety of the defense, if they could sign those two guys, L'Jarius Sneed and Chris Jones, is going to be huge because they could just really improve and not lose anybody, which is a scary sight to see for anybody in the AFC. But that's going to be probably the biggest point of emphasis for the Chiefs going forward. And the last scenario I wanted to give was surrounding the Jaguars and the situation they have going with the Falcons and Calvin Ridley. So the Falcons initially received a 2023 fifth-round pick and a 2024 conditional fourth-round pick from the Jaguars for Calvin Ridley. Now, that could all change. Well, actually, the conditional pick could change in this coming year's draft. The Jaguars could actually owe the Falcons a second-round pick if Calvin Ridley signs a contract extension with them. For that to happen, it would mean it would only turn into third-round pick if Ridley plays at least 60% of the snaps, or gets 75 receptions or 1,000 yards from this coming year. But if he extends, it could become a second-round pick. But the rumor has it, or the reports from Adam Schefter have come out, and he said that Ridley is not expected to sign an extension at any point this season and will wait until after the season to begin negotiations. So that's something to keep in mind because the Falcons are in a rebuilding stage, and I'm sure they would love for that to be a second-round pick, but most likely it'll be a conditional third-round pick just based on those reports and the Jaguars, I think, not feeling like it could be a good situation for them moving forward in the end. But for the Falcons, it would be huge, and on one hand, like I mentioned, because of the situation that they're heading into, rebuilding, new head coach Raheem Morris coming in, trying to rebuild that offense, really, because what they're missing is the quarterback, how pivotal that's going to be for them because they have the weapons. Bijan Robinson had a breakout year. Drake London also had a breakout year, arguably, and Kyle Pitts was used more, but really not to the full potential that a lot of people believe he can get to. So they need as much help as they can get for the quarterback and as well on the defensive side, to build a more whole-rounded team, because that division isn't one of the strongest in the NFC, and they competed with basically all those teams in any divisional games that they had. So this team is, for me, on the brink of, if you don't want to call them a contender, that's fine, but they're on the brink of being in the playoffs, and if they get everything right to the fullest, they could be continual playoff appearances, building on those guys' resumes and just building on Raheem Morris' resume, because I think that was a great hire for them to make, to bring in some new leadership, a new regime for him, who spent some time there as the interim coach, now gets a full job. And I think he's going to take it very seriously and have a lot of success there. And not to mention or repeat what I said before about Baker Mayfield, the Bucs looking for that answer at quarterback. The Panthers are the Panthers, and the Saints are, again, still trying to find their footing as well. They had some duds last year, but that's the kind of landscape as it stands for free agency, the rumors, what could happen with certain teams that could really elevate them going forward into next season. But we're going to take another quick break here during the show, and on the other side of it, I'll bring you two more topics, the one most recently about Russell Wilson and his contract situation. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back after this short break with the second half of the show.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back for the second half of the show on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Before I dive into the Russell Wilson contract situation, and before I throw out a lot of numbers out there for you guys with this contract, I want to remind you guys to please, if you have any questions, please use the tip and donations link down below running across that ticker. With any question that you may have, use the link streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, that link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. I'm able to see your questions better to put towards the top of the list if you guys use that link. It helps out the show a lot, the entire network, and all of our shows as well. So greatly appreciated if you guys could use that link and with any question that you may have. But without further ado, moving on to this contract situation, and I had to find a lot of websites and just inform myself a lot better on this contract situation. As I'm sure most of you may know, the Broncos gave Russell Wilson a hefty contract back in 2022, a 5-year deal worth $242.5 million. It includes a $37 million payout in 2025 that is guaranteed if Wilson is unable to pass a physical coming up to start this new year. But yeah, I'm sure it's no secret to anybody that the Broncos, not only this past season, but this whole situation with Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett, now even Sean Payton, has all really just blown up in their face, to say the least, because Russell Wilson struggled with Nathaniel Hackett. They got rid of him. Sean Payton actually said it was the worst coaching job he's ever seen. So then he took the reins, and it really didn't get that much better under Sean Payton. There were some moments where they had close games. They showed some improvement, but really overall, you've seen no growth. They benched Russell Wilson at one point during the season. He later came out saying that they benched him, or they threatened to bench him if he didn't renegotiate his contract or lower his potential injury guarantees in his contract that would mean if he got injured, his money would still be guaranteed. But obviously, he didn't renegotiate that, and they benched him towards the end of the season. And all that just kind of breaks into this situation where the Broncos are trying to get rid of him. It's no secret. And most people in the media think that he won't make it past this season, or he won't make it another season with the Broncos, just because of the whole negativity scenario surrounding him and the coaching staff, the organization. So I wrote down some scenarios that could happen with the Broncos, which one's most likely to happen, and teams that I think could still use him, because in my opinion, I don't think he's done. I don't think that no team's gonna sign him. No one's gonna take that contract. I'm not of that mindset. I think he still has something to give, at least for some teams that don't have the franchise guy on the roster, or they don't have a plan to draft one anytime soon. So one scenario that the Broncos could do is nothing. If they don't touch the contract, don't do anything at all, and still designate his release past June 1st, Denver would carry that $35.5 million cap hit into June, and then take on the $53 million of dead cap space in 2024 and $32 million in 2025. So you might be asking, why would they do this? Basically, to get the bigger hit out of the way first, right? If they designate his release past June 1st, they carry his salary, right? That's given. Then they take on $53 million initially, and then 32 less, or $32 million in 2025, which obviously is less, and it gives them some leeway, a little bit to, to fix the cap space, maneuver around it a little bit, take the worst part out of the way this year, and then live with what you can scramble out of in the next year in 2025. If they don't exercise the $22 million option, it turns into guaranteed money. So that ties in with what is most likely. If they do exercise that $22 million option that they had, they could make it a little bit less. And just because of that, making it a little bit less, this would split the cap impact into $35 million in dead money in 2024, and then $49.5 million in dead money in 2025. Only if they exercise that $22 million option, right? So if they do that, they can kind of split it up into taking on that $35 million initially, and then comes the big hit later on in 2025. But that option gives them a bit more leeway as well in cap next season compared to this season. If they were to do the first option, not do anything to the contract, not renegotiate nothing, they would just still designate him for a release after June 1st, but it just determines, or it depends on, if they want to exercise that $22 million option as well. And just from what I've read, from what I've heard on TV and stuff like that, exercising that option seems to be the most likely, because if they don't do it, it just turns into guaranteed money, into that guaranteed salary that they owe Russel Wilson. So they obviously don't want to do that, and they're going to try to do that, I'm hearing, and, try to get out of this contract as quickly as they can. It's going to feel like a drag, really, because when you give that sort of contract, you're tied to it. You're bonded to it for that time being. Investing that sort of money in a guy like Russell Wilson, for him not to pan out like you planned it, is going to cost a lot to just bail out of it with 2 years remaining. So the Broncos are in a rough spot, just cap-wise, rebuilding-wise, because once he's gone, they're going to need to find a quarterback, and then how much money do they have to work with over these next 2 years to kind of salvage something. Of course, they have their draft picks, but it's going to be a long process, drawn-out process to finally get rid of this issue that the Broncos are facing. But once they do release him past June 1st, I had some teams that I think are the most likely to pick him up. Probably not trade for him, but just to pick him up and kind of take on that contract. And there is one team that stands out to me most of all, but I will start with the teams that I think aren't as likely to get him. That being the Patriots and Commanders. Just to start off, obviously, Sam Howell, Mac Jones, and Bailey Zappi were the quarterbacks involved with both of these teams, and it's no secret that the fans, anybody that watched their games, would say that either of these teams need a quarterback. That position needs to be upgraded, and with the Patriots getting rid of Bill Belichick, bringing in Gerard Mayo as their new head coach, a younger sort of new era starting for the Patriots. And on the other side with the Commanders, they still have Sam Howell, which I really didn't think played awful. They need to get him out the door right away. I thought there were some moments, some games where he played up to the competition, most notably just off the top of my head against the Eagles. He kept them in that game in Philly and to some extent in Washington as well. But it's just being rumored that they're most likely going to draft someone with the second pick in the NFL draft. A lot of mock drafts have Jalen Daniels, Drake May going there. So those two teams, in my opinion, wouldn't be the most likely candidates for Russell Wilson, just because they have that draft scenario, that draft positioning where they could find their guys in the top 3 picks. The Patriots have the 3rd pick, and obviously Caleb Williams seems like the consensus number 1. But then after that, it seems like Drake May could be the 2, and then Jaden Daniels being drafted to the Pats if they were to go that route and get him. But if you want to play devil's advocate and say, why not trade back a few spots, fill out any voids that you think you need other than the quarterbacks, get more draft capital, and take on Russell Wilson at least for a year, that could also work. But I just don't see these teams making that sort of move. I think teams drafting in such high spots where they have a chance to get a quarterback aren't going to take the risk of moving out of it because of that hindsight backlash that they could face from everyone saying how this was the biggest mistake of the generation, of the decade, drafting or moving out of this position and missing out on a potential generational type of quarterback. I think everyone's scared to make that move, so I don't see the Patriots or Commanders really trading out of that and kind of taking that risk, that long-term risk. But another team that I thought was a good spot for Russell Wilson could be the Minnesota Vikings. They're in a similar position. Actually, no, not similar to the Pats and Commanders, similar to the next team I'm going to mention, but they're picking 11. Not many mock drafts, or in my opinion, I don't see one of the top quarterbacks making it there. You could argue J.J. McCarthy could be around that range, and if they want to take a risk on him, they could, but I just think they need other areas that they could fill to make this team a little bit better. And in the same breath, they could re-sign Kirk Cousins. It's not totally off the table that they want to move on from him. And just doing that with that scenario, if they keep Kirk Cousins, I think it'll probably benefit them a little bit more because Justin Jefferson is owed a contract extension. It's almost time to pay him. And I just believe that if I'm the front office of the Vikings and I'm trying to sell Justin Jefferson to stay here, re-sign with the Vikings, I'm saying I think it's more appealing to Justin Jefferson to ride out another year with a quarterback that he's already played with. He knows he's going to get him the ball. He knows he wants to get Jefferson the ball, get him into open space, look for matchups and exploit those matchups. I think that's easier to sell to Jefferson than bringing in Russell Wilson with a almost tarnished recent couple years in Denver. Trying to sell that to him, I don't think is very appealing at all if you want him to stay and learn a new quarterback, the way he throws, the timing, start that process all over again. I think it's more likely that they either draft one or just re-sign Kirk Cousins for another year, coming off that Achilles rupture, and then they could work out a deal with Jefferson and then look to find their long-term quarterback. But the next team that I thought was most likely the best fit, in my opinion, for Russell Wilson would be within the division with the Las Vegas Raiders. They're in a little bit worse of a situation than the Vikings just because they're picking 13, right? So that really was the selling point for me to get a guy like Russell Wilson because their only quarterback now is Aiden O'Connell after the suspension of Jimmy G for the performance-enhancing drugs. They are most likely to cut him, and I was actually informed of this that because of the medicine that he took, that guaranteed money that was left on his contract is actually not guaranteed anymore. So it makes it easier for them to cut him, get rid of him, and that only leaves you with Aiden O'Connell and new head coach Antonio Pierce. I couldn't remember his name. Antonio Pierce now, in a recent interview with The Pivot, said that he has confidence in O'Connell. He showed some signs there towards the end of the year that put him in good spots to not lose games. You know, he played pretty well in some of those games. But is he the long-term option? I think a lot of people would say no. And picking at 13, again, in my opinion, I don't see a franchise guy being there at that pick because Daniels, May, and Caleb Williams could be gone. And even J.J. McCarthy, who has risen up the draft boards, could be gone with the Vikings at 11. So I don't think they have the capital to make a trade. And I think it's going to be tough for them to make something happen with any team picking earlier than that. So bringing in Russell Wilson to at least compete with Aiden O'Connell for that spot and then moving on seems like the most likely outcome for me for the Raiders. But like always, let me know what you guys think. Is there any team that you think has a good chance of him that I didn't include? But to me, it seems like the Las Vegas Raiders would benefit the most from transitioning with Wilson and O'Connell into a new era with Antonio Pierce and not rushing into something just to get some early success sooner rather than later. But with that, I'm going to end this segment there, and we're going to go to our final break. And on the other side of the break, I want to talk about the teams that I believe in the NFC that will challenge the 49ers more next season and possibly surpass them next season. So don't go anywhere. That's coming up right after this break. And we are back for the final segment of the show. NFC teams that I believe are likely to challenge the 49ers in the NFC next year. If you missed the segments before this one, I talked about Russell Wilson and his contract situation. And before that, I mentioned the free agency updates and the rumors. So if you missed those, you could always catch them after this live episode ends on the GSMC Sports Network channel or the GSMC Podcast Network channel as well. Individual segments or the whole live episode as well. But jumping into the final topic that I have here, a bit of a discussion. Please, this segment is always the one that I like to leave open for opinion. So if you guys have any comments, want to suggest something to me, or just tell me I'm completely wrong and I don't know what I'm talking about, just please do so. Engage in the comments or live in these comments as well. But I have three teams that in my opinion are the best ones, but I'm going to start with some honorable mentions. Two honorable mentions, so almost like a top five. But a lot would have to go these teams' way if they were to be real contenders. So starting off our list with the first honorable mention being the Dallas Cowboys. I just think because of the way the NFC East isn't really stacked like the AFC, I think the Cowboys will always be there. They have a great roster, don't get me wrong, but there just always seems to be something, a distraction, an event, or just some actions that just lead up to a moment at the end of the year in the playoffs where it just all falls apart for this team. They're going to have to sign some free agents, get back some of their pieces of the puzzle like Tony Pollard this free agency and get him back, make sure that offense is still kept whole. But other than that, it just seems like, there's something going on with them that just always inevitably seems to cost them in the end. So the Cowboys are one, the first honorable mention, because of the NFC not being as strong. The second team I wanted to focus in on, honorable mention, is the Philadelphia Eagles. And again, they're not in a situation like the Cowboys where there's distraction, but over the past, really this past regular season, where it just seems like there was a lot of, internal issues, if you want to say. I can't really think of another way to say it, because there were some on and off problems with the coordinators, Nick Sirianni calling plays, or relying it to Brian Johnson, him taking it away from Brian Johnson because it wasn't really working out. You could just see live on the TV that just the body language of the guy, Jalen Hurts especially, it just seemed like he didn't agree or was just unsatisfied with what they were putting out on offense. Then they gave it to Sirianni, and then defensively, Matt Patricia came in, and they sort of improved, but then towards the end of the year, it wasn't really there. As well as they have some players potentially retiring, trying to replace Kelsey and maybe Lane Johnson. He hasn't been as vocal about it with Kelsey, but he is getting up there in that age range where you start to think about it, finding someone to replace him. But like I just touched on before, some of the pieces on defense I wanted to hone in on because the secondary had a lot of struggles. What do you do with Bradbury? He really struggled this past season, and other than Darius Slay, he was supposed to be that other lockdown corner. Maybe not to the level of Darius Slay, but he was supposed to give him more than I felt that he did this past season, and it showed in some games. The one that stands out the most is the Seahawks game where they scored the game-winning touchdown on Bradbury. Their linebackers as well already weren't their strong suit, but they could also be forced to essentially decide between Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat because both of them are a year away from free agency, and the Eagles actually granted Hassan Reddick permission to seek a trade. So one of them is most likely about to move one way or the other. They probably feel they can get more for Hassan Reddick, so they are looking for a trade like that. And if anybody knows anything about the Eagles, Howie Roseman, they are the team probably most likely to make a big trade or make a big move in the offseason or during the draft. So that's something to keep an eye on. They have good players, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts. Jalen Carter is an emerging player on the defensive side of the ball as well. But again, it's just too many factors, too many ifs, buts, things that they could or could not happen that doesn't really make them a top 3 contender for me. So moving into those top 3, the first one at the 3 spot, I have the Packers. And the Packers are in a situation where they don't have a lot of players that they could lose, but they only have $4 million in cap space. They're the NFL's youngest roster, and they could actually save $21 million of that by releasing David Bakhtiari, help them re-sign players like Darnell Savage, John Runyon, with some extra money. But in the end, there's not too many moving pieces, if, buts, or maybes that they need to fix. Just this, if you look in the playoffs, in their matchup, they played phenomenal against the Cowboys, surprised everybody. Going into Dallas, Jordan Love played almost lights out, as good as you want your playoff debut to be. Then against the 49ers, they basically had them reeling a lot during that game. It was always close, but you always kind of felt that the Packers had a bit more rolling with them. Aaron Jones was having a great game. Jordan Love was having a great game, throwing it, converting on third downs. It cost him in the end where he made that rash decision during, again, throwing back across his body towards the middle of the field. But I just think what I saw from them, it just gives me signs that they can only get better, really, because, like I mentioned, they have the NFL's youngest roster. That inexperience hurts them now, but they got that experience, which is the most important thing. Jordan Love has that under his belt now, and I think you saw his confidence building throughout the rest of the year into the playoffs, and it showed. Now I just think he's going to come in a different level, more familiarity with the offense, especially on the defensive side as well. They have great players, Quay Walker, Rashawn Gary, Jair Alexander, Kenny Clark, and just overall in an NFC North where the biggest threat is the Lions, and they made it into the playoffs as a wild card team, and I can't see why they couldn't do that again this coming season. I think they have a good chance of definitely improving and competing with the 49ers like they did this past season. But that moves me on to the Los Angeles Rams as my second best team to potentially challenge the 49ers. They have a lot more cap space, $26.3 million, 10 picks in the draft. They finally have a first round pick after so many years that they didn't after that trade with the Lions. And again, another young-ish team, a young defense mostly because of some of the players that came in. Kobe Turner and Byron Young were good pickups in the draft for them, but they definitely need some more help, especially in the secondary. Potentially losing Akella Witherspoon and somebody else I can't remember the name of right now, but their secondary was already not great, and potentially losing two starters like them could hurt them, especially in the playoffs with defenses. Help out a lot with anyone trying to make a deep run in the playoffs. But offensively, I think, again, another team that could only get better because they had some questions at running back, wide receiver, and even quarterback. If you weren't sure about Matthew Stafford at the beginning of the year, he only got better with time moving on and them really figuring out what their identity was. The emergence of Kyren Williams. I'm a big fan of Kyren Williams. Good young running back for them. Showed out tremendously this past season. And if it wasn't for that injury, he could have, I just think, had a lot better numbers and a lot crazier numbers than he did. Puka Nacua goes without saying. An amazing first-year rookie season for him. And with all that talent that those two guys brought, Cooper Kupp was injured for a lot of that time, most of the regular season, and I think he struggled to get back to what he really was, and actually probably didn't get back to any sort of resemblance of what he showed in the past. So I think getting him that time off, getting him healthy fully, really integrating him into that offense and having a whole offseason where you can plan around the weapons that you now know you have, I think could benefit them tremendously, with Matthew Stafford being a question mark of sorts just because he is older, 36 years old. But I think, in a way, that kind of helps him this year. Only this year just because he could have that one last ride, one last really good year where you invest a lot into this 1 year and then you can think about maybe trying to replace him. But I really like the Rams. Good young team. Offensively, they're in the same division as the 49ers, always competing in that division. They were able to make the playoffs with a lot of uncertainty with this team to start off the year. And I know they lost Raheem Morris, but they've lost coordinators, offensive or defensive, in the past, and it really hasn't harmed them that much. Sean McVay's a great head coach and always refills his staff with great candidates. So I'd like the potential that team has to just always be a thorn in the side for the 49ers. And lastly, are the Detroit Lions. Not only did they have a fantastic season, they have a lot of cap space, $46.4 million, 7 draft picks, and no huge free agents this offseason in the next coming months that they need to re-sign. The biggest one being Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but other than that, Amon-Ra is almost due for his extension, Penny Sewell as well, but they have some time to work it out, and I'm sure they're going to emphasize those two guys to get them extensions before anybody else. And if they do that, they're pretty much set with some of their bigger pieces already potentially being under contract if they get those two guys signed. And they only have to worry about refilling some spots where there were some weaknesses. Like I mentioned, if they lose Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, that'll be an area to fix. But also, I think the cornerbacks were a point that they needed to really improve on, because during the year it never seemed like they had a solid number one. Their number one could have arguably been Cam Sutton, and he was a good signing for them, but I just think they need a top-tier guy in that upper level of defensive backs to compete with just Puka, Cooper Kupp, A.J. Brown, Debo, Brandon Ayuk, a lot of talented receivers, DK Metcalf, a lot of good wide receivers in the NFC, a lot of offensive power. You need good defensive backs, good secondary to combat that. And I just think that combining it with their offensive line that was, in my opinion, the best in football. Their defensive line was very good with Aiden Hutchinson leading the way for them. And if they could draft another pass rusher, I think would benefit them greatly. But you have guys like Jahmyr Gibbs showed out as the year went along, and then now with a full offseason, getting his routines down, training, knows what he's supposed to play like. I think he's one of the players to look out for next season, where he could have one of those really impressive big jumps in the whole league if everything turns out right and they use him a lot more than they did and a lot more frequently in that combination that they have with David Montgomery. But they have everything going for them, a lot of cap space, young roster, and if they re-sign Jared Goff as well, they have that sort of veteran quarterback position guy that could lead this team into a lot of success in the future if they get everything aligned, they get their ducks aligned and execute this offseason, where they learned a lot of rough lessons just in the NFC Championship alone, where they had it won basically, but they just didn't show up in the second half. So that's going to serve them well, I think. Having that taste in their mouth that whole offseason is going to really motivate them, I think, to really be that big challenger for the 49ers and potentially surpass them as well. I think it would be interesting to see how that plays out and if they could take that next step, now being the hunted instead of the hunters in the NFC next season. But that's going to wrap it up for me for this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I want to thank you guys again for tuning into this live episode and just engaging with any of the segments or the show afterwards if you didn't catch it live. Your engagement means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe, like, comment on the show, as well as following us on the many forms of social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok for more of this sort of content. And again, I want to thank you guys. Thank everyone for joining me on this episode. And please join me again tomorrow for more discussion and storylines around the NFL. But for now, I've been your host, Manny Maradiaga. Thanking you guys again, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks again.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that